Picture a room. Not a creepy room. Nothing so cliche as that. This is just a storage room. Stone walls, high ceilings. Somewhere in Italy, 1912. The light comes from a window that's more of a slit than anything designed for comfort. There are crates. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, piled floor to ceiling, covered in dust so thick you could write your name in it. And the smell. Centuries of vellum and iron, and something older than both. That particular scent that only exists in places where important things have been forgotten. A man is standing in this room. His name doesn't really matter yet. What matters is that he is a book dealer, and a good one. A man who has spent his entire adult life understanding the difference between a document that is merely old and a document that is significant. He's been in rooms like this before. He knows the feeling of pulling a codex from a crate and knowing, before he even opens it, that it matters. That specific weight in your hands, that pull. He works through the crates methodically. Old texts, a few astronomical charts, some letters in Latin. Nice things, valuable things, nothing remarkable. And then he finds it. It doesn't look like much at first. The binding is worn, the page is slightly warped. He opens it carefully. The way you open something you're afraid might fall apart if you're not gentle enough. The text is immediately wrong. Not wrong like it's damaged. Not wrong like the ink is run or the pages have faded. Wrong in a completely different way. The script is fluid, confident, written with the kind of ease you only see from someone who's been writing the same language their entire life. It's beautiful even, except he can't read a single word of it. He flips to another page. There's plants. Or things that look like plants, roots that split and rejoin in ways that shouldn't be anatomically possible, flowers that don't exist. He flips again. There's women, dozens of them, small and unclothed, submerged in green water, connected by pipes that look like veins or intestines, or something he doesn't really have a name for. He flips faster now. So there's star charts, circles within circles. A folded page that opens to reveal a map, maybe, of something. Some city, some cosmos, some system he can't place. He closes it, he sets it down, and then he picks it up again. And here is what this man, this experienced, skeptical, worldly dealer of rare manuscripts understood in that moment, in that cold storeroom in Italy in 1912. This book was written by someone who understood every word of it perfectly, and nobody else ever has. Welcome back to Paranormal Directive 13. I am your host, Matt, and today we are going somewhere that I've been a little hesitant to go to. And it's not because the topic is dangerous, it's not because I'm afraid of it, but because I've been sitting on this one for a long time, trying to figure out how to really do it. Because this isn't just another mystery. This isn't a blurry photograph or an unnamed witness or a story that kind of falls apart if you look at it hard enough. This is a book, a real, physical, hold it in your hands, look at it under a microscope book. It is at Yale University right now in the Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library. You can look at high-resolution scans of every single page online for free. It's one of the most studied, most scrutinized, most obsessively analyzed documents in human history. And nobody can read it. Not a word, not a syllable. After more than a century of professional cryptographers, world-class linguists, AI systems, NSA analysts, and about 10,000 passionate amateurs who were completely convinced they'd cracked it, nobody has decoded a single verified sentence of this thing. It's named after the man who found it, which is maybe a little unfair because he never managed to figure it out either. It was written sometime in the early 1400s, maybe as late as the 1430s. It's about 240 pages long, full of illustrations organized into what look like sections. A botany section, an astronomy section, a biology section, a cosmology section. Something that might be a recipe book. It looks, in format and layout, exactly like the kind of medical or scientific text a learned person in medieval Europe might have owned. Except the text is completely, totally, utterly unreadable. And here is the thing that separates this from a simple unsolved puzzle. The writing doesn't read like gibberish. It doesn't look like someone just made up a bunch of random squiggles. Statistical analysis of the text shows that it follows the same mathematical patterns as real, actual human languages. It behaves like a language. It walks like a language. It talks like language. It just doesn't say anything we understand. So the real question, the one we're going to spend the next hour or so sitting with, isn't just what does it say, it's whose language is it? And maybe, just maybe, whether it was ever meant for us at all. This is the Voynich Manuscript.
You walk in tired and hungry, one bad dinner away from losing it. You don't like to cook. You don't want more takeout. You just want something good. That's why there's Dish by Blue Apron. Pre-made meals with at least 20 grams of protein and no artificial flavors or colors. From fridge to fork in 5 minutes or less. Keep the flavor. Ditch the subscription. Get 20% off your first 2 orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
The Bleacher Report app is your destination for sports. Right now, the NBA is heating up, March Madness is here, and MLB is almost back. Every day there's a new headline, a new highlight, a new moment you've got to see for yourself. That's why I stay locked in with the Bleacher Report app. For me, it's about staying connected to my sports. I can follow the teams I care about, get real-time scores, breaking news, and highlights all in one place. Download the Bleacher Report app today so you never miss a moment.
So let's back up. Let's go back to that room in Italy. The year is 1912. The man is Wilfrid Voynich. And if you want to understand why this discovery hit the world as hard as it did, you need to understand who Wilfrid Voynich was. Because he's not the kind of person you'd expect to be wandering through a Jesuit storeroom in Frascati. Wilfrid Voynich was born in Lithuania in 1865. He was a revolutionary, an actual, committed, arrested, and imprisoned revolutionary. He was part of a nationalist group in Russian-controlled Poland, got caught, and got sentenced to Siberia. And then, in a story that honestly deserves its own podcast, escaped. Not metaphorically, he literally escaped from Siberia, made his way across Europe, ended up in London, reinvented himself as a rare book stealer, and became one of the most respected antiquarian booksellers in the world, and eventually settled in New York. So this is a man who has seen things. This is a man who has a pretty high threshold for strange. In 1912, Voynich traveled to Italy to purchase manuscripts from a Jesuit collection that was being quietly, very quietly, sold off. The details of exactly where and how are still somewhat murky, and Voynich himself was deliberately cagey about the specifics for the rest of his life. What he said was that he found the manuscripts in an ancient castle in southern Europe, which sounds appropriately dramatic and was probably designed to protect the Jesuits from Italian authorities who weren't exactly thrilled about church property being sold. Most historians now believe the manuscripts came from the Villa Montegrone in Frascati or possibly Villa Torlonia at Castel Gandolfo. Both were used by Jesuits to hide their most valuable collections when the Italian state was making a lot of noise about seizing church property in the late 19th century. Either way, crates of manuscripts, Dusty Hilltop, former revolutionary turned book dealer. And then this book. Voynich later described finding it among ordinary manuscripts. Nothing special around it, no indication it was anything other than another medieval codex. But he knew immediately, and he bought it on the spot. Now, he spent the remaining years of his life convinced, obsessed really, with a particular theory about what the manuscript was. He believed it had been written by the 13th century English friar and proto-scientist Roger Bacon. He believed it was some kind of scientific treatise encoded by Bacon to protect his radical ideas from the church. He spent decades trying to prove this, eventually going public with this theory in a 1921 lecture and article that he titled, brilliantly, The Bacon Cipher Manuscript. And the world went a little bit nuts. Here's this mysterious book, centuries old, written in an unknown script, full of bizarre illustrations. and the man who found it claiming it was written by one of the most famous scientists in medieval history. Cryptographers got involved, scholars got involved, people made careers out of attempting to decode it. And then carbon dating came along and politely dismantled the whole Roger Bacon theory, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's stay in 1912. Let's stay with Voynich and this book. Imagine you've brought this book home. You've cleared your desk, you have good light, you've seen a lot of manuscripts, and you know how to look at one. The first thing you really notice, is the handwriting itself. Not what it says, but how it's written. It flows. Medieval manuscripts are almost always full of corrections. Crossouts, blots, little superscript letters where someone squeezed in a missing word, margins where a scribe disagreed with himself. The general organized chaos of someone committing thoughts to permanent record. The Voynich manuscript has none of that. None at all. The script runs across the page with a rhythmic, almost hypnotic consistency. No hesitations, no second thoughts, no visible errors. Whoever wrote this, and we now know at least 2, maybe even 5 different people wrote different sections, wrote as if they had been speaking this language their whole life and were simply getting it down on paper. So either they were incredibly meticulous forgers who made 0 mistakes across 240 pages, or they actually knew exactly what they were writing. Now, let's look at the pictures. The botanical section is the largest. It's something like 113 full-page plant illustrations. And the thing about these plants is they look real, not abstract art, not like random shapes. They look like somebody studied plants and drew what they saw. There are roots and stems and leaves and flowers, rendered with genuine care and specificity. But they're not real plants. Not exactly. Professional botanists have been trying to match the Voynich plants to known species for over a century. And the closest anyone has gotten is that one kind of looks like it might be related to ... One researcher, named Edith Sherwood, spent years on the project and claims she could match up to 98% of the plants to Italian flora. But even she acknowledged that the drawings have features that just don't exist in nature. Roots that split apart and then rejoin. Leaves that grow in configurations that would be physically impossible. One plant appears to have a cat's body for its root system, which is either alchemical symbolism or the wildest botanical mutation in history. Some researchers think the plants are purely imaginary. Fantasy biology designed to look real without being real. Others think that they're just stylized real plants, drawn by someone working from memory rather than direct observation. And some, and this is where it gets interesting, think they're not plants at all. They think the illustrations are mnemonic devices, visual metaphors, alchemical diagrams dressed up to look like an herbal. Where the root structure doesn't represent a root, it represents a chemical process. But the plants aren't even the weirdest part. So let's talk about the biological section. This is the part of the manuscript that if you're reading about it late at night, might make you close the tab and go do something normal for a little while. About 20 folios, which is 40 or so pages, are filled with what scholars generously call nymphs, small female figures, mostly unclothed, immersed in pools of green fluid, connected to each other by an elaborate network of pipes and tubes. Sometimes the pipes look like plumbing, sometimes they look uncomfortably like human internal organs. Sometimes the green water seems to flow through the figures rather than around them, like it's circulating through a system. And now, a system, that word is important because this section doesn't feel like decoration, it feels like documentation, like someone is diagramming a process. Like the figures aren't characters in a scene, they're components in a mechanism. And there's 3 main theories for what this section is. Theory 1, it's a balneology text, a medical treatise on therapeutic bathing, which was a legitimate and widespread practice in 15th century Europe. Bathing at specific mineral springs for specific ailments with specific timing and preparation. There are other medieval manuscripts that look somewhat familiar. Theory 2, it's an alchemical diagram. The green water isn't water, it's the universal solvent or some specific chemical reagent. The pipes aren't pipes, they're stages of a transformation process. And the nymphs represent spirits or essences moving through phases of refinement. And theory 3 is that it's a women's health manual, a guide for bathing practices for fertility, pregnancy, and postpartum care, written for wealthy women who would have had the time and resources to follow such a regimen. One researcher named Nicholas Gibbs spent years on this theory, eventually publishing in 2017 that the manuscript was an abbreviated Latin health guide for women, encoded to protect the privacy of its patients. He said he could read it. Linguists looked at his translation. They said it was grammatically incoherent. So, back to square one. Now, the astronomical section looks, at first glance, like the most straightforward part of the manuscript. Circular diagrams, stars, a sun, a moon, zodiac signs, 12 diagrams that seem to map the sky. Except, some of the astronomical diagrams don't match the night sky as seen from Earth. Not historical Earth, not modern Earth, not any Earth. Researchers have tried to find the specific arrangement of stars depicted in certain diagrams by looking at historical star catalogs, using software to simulate what the sky would have looked like from various locations on Earth in the early 1400s. And there's nothing. The arrangements don't correspond to any known astronomical observation. Now, one explanation is that the author wasn't drawing what the sky actually looks like. They were drawing a cosmological model, a symbolic representation of how the celestial sphere was understood to work according to the natural philosophy of the day. Another explanation is that whoever drew these was looking at the sky we haven't seen. So I'm just going to leave that there for a minute. And the zodiac section, at least, is interesting for different reasons. Each zodiac sign gets its own diagram, a central emblem surrounded by exactly 30 small figures, 30 figures per sign, 30 degrees per sign in medieval astrology. That's not coincidence. That is precise, specific, deliberate knowledge embedded in the structure of the image. And the figures are dressed in recognizably 15th century European fashion. Specific tunics, specific headpieces, specific shoes. Costume historians have used these details to confirm, independently of the carbon dating, that this manuscript is from the 1400s. So somebody who knew their medieval European fashion apparently also knew their Aztec botany and their unknowable sky. The Rosettes Page is a single massive foldout, the kind you have to open and keep opening. And when you finally have it fully extended, you're looking at a panel that shows 9 interconnected circular structures, looking down at a map of 9 cities, all connected by causeways or pipelines, all containing further structures within them. Some of the circles contain what looks like fortifications. Some contain what might be buildings. The whole thing is linked together in a way that suggests a system. Now again, that word, a functioning integrated system. The mainstream interpretation, it's a TO map, a medieval cartographic style used to represent the known world, or possibly a diagram of the celestial spheres. Slightly less mainstream interpretation is it's a map of something else, something the author had access to that we don't. And the fringe interpretation is it's a blueprint, a technical drawing of a telescope maybe, or a microscope, or something that we don't really know or have a name for yet. So to me, it looks like someone was very carefully documenting a place they had been, somewhere specific, with specific structures and specific connections. And they needed you to understand how it all fit together. The question is just where. So now, let's anchor this. Let's take a step back from the weird and stand on the solid ground for a minute, because there is solid ground here and it's important. The Voynich Manuscript is not a rumor. It's not a legend. It's not a story someone's grandfather told. It is a physical object that you can go to Yale and ask to see. It has been subjected to some of the most rigorous forensic and scientific analysis in the history of document studies. And this is what we know for certain. In 2009, Yale permitted researchers to take 4 small samples of the vellum, which is the calfskin parchment the manuscript is written on, from 4 different sections of the book. These samples were analyzed at the University of Arizona's AMS Radiocarbon Laboratory. And the results from all 4 samples were consistent with each other. They placed the creation of the vellum, not the writing, but the preparation of the animal hides they were written on between 1404 and 1438 with a 95% confidence interval. That is a remarkably tight window for carbon dating. 4 samples, 4 different sections, all pointing to the same 34-year period in early 15th century. So this does a few things. First, it decisively kills the Roger Bacon theory. Roger Bacon died in 92. That's 100 years before this vellum was even being prepared. He didn't write it. Second, and this is something the Voynich Library's own technical reports emphasize, the vellum from different quires appears to come from hides that were all prepared around the same time. There's no evidence of a big gap between when the animals died and when someone started writing on their skin. This isn't recycled parchment. This isn't someone writing on a 100-year-old blank page to fake an older date. This book was made and then almost immediately used sometime in the early 1400s. So whatever this is, it is real and it is old. Now the ink is iron gall. And every time I hear iron gall, I think of the movie National Treasure when Nicolas Cage is talking about, he says it's written with iron gall ink and it's one of the best movies ever. Anyways, the ink is iron gall, a completely standard medieval formulation made from oak galls and iron sulfate, common as dirt in the 15th century European scriptoria. No synthetic dyes, no modern compounds, nothing that doesn't belong in a medieval workshop. The pigments in the illustrations, the blues, the greens, the reds, are consistent with what you'd expect from a skilled 15th century illuminator. Azurite for blue, copper-based greens, iron oxide and vermilion for red. The same palette you'd find in any high-quality illuminated manuscript from the same period and region. And the detail that I think gets overlooked a little bit, 14 to 15 calf skins were used to make this manuscript. That is a lot of animals. That's a significant capital expenditure. This was not cheap to produce. Whoever made this wasn't doodling. They weren't bored. They were investing real resources, time, money, skilled labor, into producing something they believed was important enough to be worth it. All right, so the chain of custody. Where did this book live for the 600 years between when it was made and when it ended up at Yale? We can trace it with reasonable confidence back to 1639. That's when a Prague alchemist named George Baresch, a real person, well documented, wrote a letter to Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit scholar in Rome who was famous for, among other things, his work on Egyptian hieroglyphs. Baresch described a book he owned, a book in an unknown script that had been baffling him for years. He called it a sphinx. He begged Kircher to help him decode it. Kircher apparently either didn't respond or responded with a polite non-answer because Baresch wrote again. And then Baresch died, and the manuscript passed to Johannes Marcus Marci, rector of Charles University in Prague, who eventually, in 1665 or 1666, sent the manuscript to Kircher in Rome with a letter explaining its history. That letter, which was found folded inside the manuscript when Voynich discovered it, is incredibly valuable because it mentions that according to Marci's sources, the book had previously been owned by Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who had purchased it for 600 gold ducats. Now that's approximately 2.1 kilograms of gold. At current gold prices, that's somewhere in the range of $150,000. And Rudolph was paying this in the late 1500s, which means the manuscript had already acquired a reputation as something extraordinary. Rudolph II, by the way, was himself a fascinating figure. He ruled from Prague. He was obsessed with the occult, with alchemy, with the strange and the inexplicable. He assembled what was essentially Europe's greatest cabinet of wonders. Rare artifacts, unusual animals, optical instruments, alchemical apparatus. If you had something weird and valuable, Rudolph wanted it. His court was a magnet for mystics, astrologers, and the kind of people who claimed to have decoded ancient secrets. So a book no one could read, possibly attributed to the famous Roger Bacon, sold to Rudolph by person or persons unknown, tracks perfectly. After Rudolph, the manuscript moved through a few more hands in Prague. After Kircher received it, it stayed in the library of Collegio Romano in Rome. After the Italian state started making noise about church property, the Jesuits hid it. And then Voynich found it in 1912, and in 1969, it was donated to Yale. So that is the story, or as much of it as we have. So what's missing from that chain is anything before Rudolph II. We have no idea where this book was between 1438, which is the latest possible date for the vellum, and roughly 1600 when it enters the historical record. That is 160 years of silence. 160 years is a lot of time for a book to travel. Now, we've established that this is a real 15th century document. Real materials, real craftsmanship, real resources invested in its production. Now let's talk about why it's absolutely baffling. Voynichese, which is what researchers call the writing system, consists of somewhere between 25 and 30 core symbols. When you account for ligatures and variations, estimates go as high as 70 individual glyphs. They are written left to right in what appear to be words separated by spaces, arranged in lines on the page. So far, normal. The problem is what happens when you start analyzing those words statistically. In 1949, a linguist and quantitative researcher named George Zipf, Z-I-P-F, described a law, Zipf's law, that states in any natural language, the frequency of a word is inversely proportional to its rank. The most common word appears roughly twice as often as the second most common, 3 times as often as the third, and so on. This pattern holds across virtually every natural language ever studied. English, Latin, Chinese, Arabic, ancient languages, modern languages, all of them. Voynichese follows Zipf's law perfectly. Not approximately, not kind of, but perfectly. The word entropy, and we're not talking about the entropy of energy, but the measure of information density per word, falls within the normal range for natural human languages. One computational study found that parts of the manuscript have word entropy comparable to English, Arabic, and Chinese. Furthermore, the words follow consistent positional cues. Certain characters only appear at the beginnings of words. Certain others only appear at the ends. Some characters never follow each other. These are the kinds of orthographic constraints that emerge naturally in real languages. They're not random, they're not decorative, they reflect some underlying structural logic. So on the word level, this is a language. Every statistical test we have says language. But where it gets weird, on the character level, on the level of individual letters, something in there breaks a little bit. The character entropy of Voynichese, which is how predictable individual characters are, is around 2.0 bits per character. Now, for comparison, Latin, Italian, and English fall between 3.0 and 4.0. This means that in Voynichese, knowing one character tells you more about what the next character will be than in any known natural language. The text is, at the character level, too predictable, too orderly, too constrained. In a natural language, there's a kind of beautiful messiness at the letter level. English, for instance, has lots of weird spellings, irregularities, borrowings from other languages, historical artifacts. Now, to be fair, English is a really messed up language, and that's coming from someone who speaks it and reads it fluently. Voynichese has none of that noise. It's almost suspiciously clean. Words repeat in ways natural languages don't. The same word appearing 3 times in a row, variants of a word, differing by a single character, clustering together in ways that feel less like vocabulary and more like a generation system, like someone had rules for producing word shapes and was following those rules. Now, I keep coming back to this point because it is one of the more unsettling details in the whole manuscript. Medieval scribes made mistakes. Of course they did. They were human beings copying text by hand, often in not great lighting, often for long hours. The manuscripts they produced are littered with evidence of their humanity. Crossouts, marginal additions, correction marks, blots, the whole archaeology of someone trying to get something right and not always succeeding. The Voynich Manuscript has essentially none of this. 240 pages, written by what researchers now believe was at least 2 scribes, possibly up to 5, and the text flows through the whole manuscript with an almost eerie consistency, fluid and rhythmic and uncorrected. Now, there's a couple ways to explain this. First, it was copied from a pre-existing perfected draft. Someone wrote out a rough draft, corrected that, and then the manuscript we have is a clean, final copy. And this happens a lot with important documents. Second, the scribe was a master forger of exceptional discipline. So skilled and so careful that they produced 240 pages without a single visible mistake. Not impossible, but 240 pages, possibly 5 scribes, all of them with the same inhuman consistency. It's a little strange. And third, they were writing something they understood completely and fluently, like how you can write your own name without thinking about it. So it's up to you to decide really which explanation you are most comfortable with for that. Now, another thing that makes 0 sense if this book is a hoax. In the 1970s, a codebreaker named Prescott Currier discovered that the text of the manuscript could be divided into 2 distinct statistical types, which he called language A and language B. These aren't just stylistic variations. The 2 quote-unquote languages have different character frequencies, different word structures, different word lengths. They behave like 2 related but distinct dialects, or possibly 2 different encoding schemes applied to the same underlying language. Language A tends to dominate the herbal and botanical sections. Language B is more common in the biological and cosmological sections. Later analysis by researcher Lisa Fragan Davis identified at least 5 distinct handwriting styles across the manuscript. So, there's at least 2 distinct linguistic registers, at least 5 different people writing them, all maintaining a consistent, uncorrected, flowing script throughout. If this is a hoax, if someone just made up a bunch of nonsense symbols to fool Rudolph II or whoever, why have 5 people working on it? Why maintain 2 different statistical dialects across different sections? Why go to that level of structural complexity for something that's just supposed to look mysterious? And if it's a real language, why don't we have any other example of it anywhere in the world? All right, so let's go through the theories. And I'm going to start with the ones that are most academically respectable, and we're going to work our way towards the ones that are, well, the most Paranormal Directive 13. The first theory is the hoax. In 2003, a psychologist named Gordon Rugg proposed what became a fairly well-known argument. The Voynich Manuscript was a hoax, specifically created by Edward Kelly to defraud Rudolph II. Edward Kelly was a scryer, a kind of mystic or spirit medium, who worked with John Dee, the famous Elizabethan scholar and royal astrologer. Kelly had a reputation as, to put it gently, a creative entrepreneur who understood what wealthy patrons wanted and found ways to provide it. Rugg's argument was that Kelly used a device called a card and grill, essentially a card with holes cut in it that you lay over a grid of syllables to generate pseudo-languages. You move the grill, record the visible syllables, move it again, record more. The result is text that follows word frequency rules because the syllable grid is constructed systematically, but has no semantic meaning because the selection process is mechanical. Rugg actually demonstrated this. He showed how you could produce text that looked statistically like Voynichese in the same amount of time it would take to write it. Now, this is a compelling argument, and it's not impossible. But the hoax theory does have problems. 14 to 15 calfskins, for one. Months of skilled artistic labor for the illustrations. Multiple scribes. 2 distinct linguistic registers. 240 pages of consistent, detailed, structured text. Rugg's method can produce something that looks like Voynich's. Critics like Nicholas Pelling have pointed out that it cannot account for the entire 240-page consistency, the full complexity of the word structure, the positional rules, the section-specific vocabulary. And here's a question that the hoax theory can never quite answer. If you're trying to fool Rudolph II, a man famous for paying for mysterious things, why would you need 240 pages? Rudolph was rich and gullible. You could have probably gotten your 600 gold ducats with 50 pages. With 30, why does this book go on and on and on? Why does it feel complete? Now, the next is the cipher theory. The cipher theory is that the text encodes a real European language, like Latin, Italian, or German, via some substitution or encoding system, and it's probably the most academically mainstream position. The evidence for it is the statistical properties of the text are exactly what you'd expect from an encoded language. The structure is there, the information density is there. It just needs a key. Now, the evidence against it, we have tried every classical cipher technique in existence with professional cryptographers, with computers, with AI, and none of it produces consistent, meaningful text. The NSA worked on this. William Friedman, who broke Japan's purple cipher in World War II, spent years on Voynich. He walked away without a solution. His colleague, John Tiltman, a distinguished British cryptanalyst, concluded that any cipher scheme that could produce Voynich's would require cryptographic sophistication far beyond anything documented in the 15th century. The homophobic and polyalphabetic systems that could theoretically do the job weren't invented until much later. And Mary D'Imperio, in her NSA-published monograph, The Voynich Manuscript, An Elegant Enigma, which remains one of the definitive cryptological surveys on the manuscript, essentially concluded that no proposed decipherment had satisfied both the statistical and contextual requirements for acceptance. 110 years, the world's best codebreakers, and nothing. Then we have the herbal medical manual theory. This is the theory that the Voynich is basically what it looks like. A comprehensive herbal and medical manual, probably used by a physician or apothecary. Plants and their properties, bathing treatments, astrological medicine, recipes. It's not a crazy theory. Manuscripts like this existed. The format is right, the sections make sense in that framework. The problem is the plants. If this is a real herbal, the plants should be identifiable. And while some researchers have claimed matches to known species, nobody has done it convincingly and consistently across all 113 plant illustrations. The fantastical features, the impossible roots, the hybrid biology, the cat-body root system, keep getting in the way. And also, if it's a practical medical manual, why encode it? Herbals were not secret documents. They were teaching tools and reference books. You don't hide the recipes in a code if you want your apprentices to be able to use them. Unless it's an alchemical manual, which is different. Alchemists had very good reasons to encode their work. Trade secrets, religious sensitivity, the simple desire not to have your competitors steal your formulas. An alchemical manual for a wealthy private patron encoded to protect proprietary knowledge? That actually makes a lot of sense. It just doesn't explain the plants that don't exist. And then we move on to the constructed language theory. William Friedman, by the end of his life, believed the most likely explanation was that the manuscript encoded a constructed language, a deliberately invented tongue created for some philosophical or scholarly purpose, written in a bespoke script.
The Bleacher Report app is your destination for sports. Right now, the NBA is heating up, March Madness is here, and MLB is almost back. Every day there's a new headline, a new highlight, a new moment you've got to see for yourself. That's why I stay locked in with the Bleacher Report app. For me, it's about staying connected to my sports. I can follow the teams I care about, get real-time scores, breaking news, and highlights all in one place. Download the Bleacher Report app today so you never miss a moment.
This was actually a real intellectual pursuit in the 15th and 16th centuries. Scholars dreamed of creating a perfect philosophical language that would be free from the ambiguities and irregularities of natural languages. A language that could express any concept with precision. If someone had actually built such a language, carefully constructed with its own grammar and vocabulary, and then encoded it further in a unique script, the result would look exactly like what we see in the Voynich. Statistical properties of a natural language, character-level patterns of an artificial system, perfectly consistent because it's following rules, not expressing the organic messiness of real speech. This theory has the advantage of explaining both the linguistic regularity and the lack of any external parallel. It's unique because it was designed to be unique. The problem is if someone went to the trouble of inventing a complete language and encoding a significant text in it, where is the key? Where is the Rosetta Stone, the dictionary, the grammar guide? A constructed language without an index is useless to anyone but its creator. Why would you build this if no one else could ever use it, unless it wasn't meant for other people? So now we move into the Aztec New World theory. And this one is a detour into genuinely controversial territory. Starting in the 1990s, researchers Arthur Tucker and Rexford Talbot proposed that the Voynich Manuscript originated not in Europe, but in 16th century Mesoamerica. Tucker claimed to identify specific plants in the manuscript as indigenous to Mexico, including the American sunflower, Helanthus annuus, and species of Mesoamerican pepper that simply didn't grow in Europe. He argued that the manuscript's artistic style, flat, non-perspectival, somewhat childlike, matched indigenous Mesoamerican conventions better than contemporary European ones. Under this theory, Voynichese might be a phonetic transcription of Nahuatl, the Aztec language, recorded by indigenous physicians in the colonial schools established by Spanish missionaries in the 1520s onward. It's a fascinating theory, and some of the plant identifications are genuinely interesting. The problem with that is the carbon dating. The vellum dates to 1404, 1438, somewhere in there. Columbus, as much of a scumbag as he was, didn't reach the Americas until 1492. If this manuscript was written by indigenous Mesoamerican physicians in colonial Mexico, how do they have 15th century European calfskin vellum? Tucker's response is that the vellum might have been old stock, blank pages that had been stored unused for decades before being written on. And while it's theoretically possible, and it happens, the Beinecke's own analysis found no evidence of a long gap between when the hides were prepared and when they were written on. Most mainstream researchers find the Aztec theory unconvincing, but it introduced something important to the conversation: the possibility that this manuscript's origins might be somewhere completely unexpected. Okay, so we've now done the responsible part. We've covered the real forensic data, the mainstream theories, the academic debates. Now let's talk about the things that are harder to account for. The things that live in the space between this is a cipher and this is very, very strange. This is the fun stuff. This is where Paranormal Directive 13 likes to live with everything. In 2021, a researcher named Fasano published a paper arguing that the Voynich manuscript is the most sustained and elaborate example of glossolalia ever recorded. Glossolalia. I don't even know how to say this word. Glossolalia. Speaking in tongues. The word itself is speaking in tongues. The religious practice or phenomenon, depending on your perspective, where a person, often in a state of religious ecstasy or trance, produces fluent speech in a language that is structured and rhythmic and utterly unidentifiable. The thing about this is that it actually does follow some of the statistical patterns of language. Studies of documented glossolalia show Zipfian word frequencies, consistent phonetic rules, the structural shell of language without semantic content. Under this theory, the person or people who wrote the Voynich were not encoding anything. They weren't trying to hide anything. They were in an altered state, religious ecstasy, trance, some form of visionary experience. And they were writing down what they heard or received without it meaning anything in the conventional sense. This would explain the absence of corrections. If you're in a trance, you don't go back and second guess yourself. You write what comes. It would explain the confident flowing script. Same reason. It would explain why no one can decode it. You can't decode something that was never encoded. And would explain the illustrations, the impossible plants, the nymphs in the pipes, the rosette maps, as visions, as the visual vocabulary of the same experience that was producing the text. Now, there's something about the idea of a 15th century person sitting in a room in some state we can't imagine, writing 240 pages of perfect, fluent, unreachable language. And then artists came in and drew what they saw. That's a little weird to me. Now, here is a gentler version of the fringe theories. What if the Voynich is the last surviving document of a culture or tradition that has otherwise completely disappeared? Not aliens, not Atlantis, just a medical and philosophical tradition that was fully developed, had its own language and script, produced this text as one of its major works, and was then eradicated so thoroughly by war or plague or religious persecution or just plain old bad luck that this one book is literally all that survived. History is full of lost languages. Linear A, the script of Minoan civilization, has never been decoded. Proto-Sinaitic, one of the earliest known writing systems, remains only partially understood. The Indus Valley script, used by a civilization of several million people at its height, has resisted decoding for a century. What if Voynichese is in that category? A real language, a real script, with real semantic content, just from a tradition that left no other trace. The problem is that most unknown scripts are eventually decoded because they share features with known writing systems, or because bilingual inscriptions turn up, or because the culture that produced them left other artifacts that provide context. Voynichese shares no features with any known script. No bilingual text has ever been found. The cultural context is completely absent. Either this tradition was exceptionally isolated, or the manuscript traveled very far from wherever it originated, or it didn't originate here. Okay, so I promised that I would get here, so let's get here. In paranormal and fringe research communities, the extraterrestrial theory for Voynich has been around for decades. Eric von Daniken, the ancient astronaut guy, links it to extraterrestrial visitors. Pop culture has run with it. Video games, documentaries, internet forums. The alien book version of the Voynich is practically a genre unto itself. The arguments: the plants don't exist on Earth. The astronomical diagrams don't match any earthly sky. The script bears no relationship to any human writing system. The biological section, under certain interpretive lenses, looks less like a guide to bathing and more like a manual for biological processes no human culture had documented. And then there's the deeper argument, which is more philosophical than evidential. The sheer number of highly intelligent, rigorously trained people who have devoted serious time and resources to this problem and failed is statistically extraordinary. If this were a human cipher, some human should have cracked it by now. If it's a constructed language, some trace of its construction should have survived. If it's a hoax that maintains its consistency across 240 pages and 5 scribes with supernatural discipline. At some point, and I'm not totally saying we're there, I'm just pointing it out, when you've exhausted every human explanation, you have to at least ask the question, what's left? Now, the forensical rebuttal: the manuscript is made from earth cows. Written with earth oak galls, the pigments come from earth minerals. The cat skin was prepared with completely standard medieval techniques. The costume details on the zodiac figures are recognizable 15th century European fashion. Whatever this book is, whoever made it was working with materials from this planet. If it's alien, it's an alien that went to extraordinary lengths to use period-appropriate medieval Italian materials, which is either a strong argument against extraterrestrial origin, or it's a strong argument for a very, very careful alien. Now, let's get into the things that nobody, not the mainstream researchers, not the fringe theorists, not even the AI systems, have been able to satisfactorily explain. The manuscript itself is incomplete. We know this from the quire numbering, the way the pages are organized into groups, which shows gaps. Originally, there were probably around 272 pages. Currently, there are about 234. That's roughly 38 missing pages. Now, pages get lost from manuscripts all the time. Centuries of handling, storage, accidents, deliberate removal. But who removed them? And when? The manuscript was in Jesuit hands for over 200 years. If the missing pages contained dangerous or heretical content, the Jesuits had both the motive and the means to remove them. Kircher received the manuscript specifically to decode it and never reported any success. Did he find something that needed to disappear? Or what if the missing pages were the key? What if somewhere in those 38 vanished pages was the Rosetta Stone moment, the vocabulary list, the grammar guide, the passage that matched up with a known text and let you decode everything? We will probably never know. But just think about that for a minute. There's this book, which no one can read, and it's also not the complete book. Now, going back to the multiple scribes problem, at least 5 different people working in at least 2 distinct linguistic registers produced this manuscript. Medieval manuscripts were often collaborative projects. Scriptoria, which is workshops where manuscripts were copied, employed multiple scribes working simultaneously on different sections. That is normal. What's not normal is we have no record of this manuscript ever being copied or referenced anywhere in medieval literature. Surviving medieval texts reference each other constantly. Scholars cited their sources. Bibliographies existed. Catalogs of important books were compiled. Not one medieval text mentions a manuscript that might be the Voynich. No copy has ever been found, no abbreviated version, no quotation, no mention of it as a reference. 5 scribes worked on something that apparently no one ever discussed. A major, expensive, collaborative production. And it left no trace in any record until George Baresh complained about it in a private letter in 1639. Where was it for 200 years? Who was using it? Who was keeping it? And why the silence? Now, here's the thing that really breaks the brain of everyone who tries to sit with this seriously. On the word level, language. On the character level, too simple. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and they shouldn't be. In a natural language, the word level and character level entropy are related. They're produced by the same underlying system, the language itself. A language that looks like language at the word level should also look like language at the character level. The same rules that govern word frequency should produce the character complexity to expect from a real tongue, unless the 2 levels were designed separately, unless someone built a system that mimics word-level language statistics deliberately, while using a character generation method that's more constrained than any natural language. If that's true, if this is engineered language designed to pass certain tests while failing others, then someone in the 15th century had a sophisticated enough understanding of linguistics to know what tests to pass. They understood Zipf's law before Zipf described it. They understood entropy before Shannon formalized it. They engineered a linguistic structure that would fool every analytical approach short of the ones developed in the 20th century. Or, the other option, the reason the character level statistics don't match any natural language is because it isn't one. It's something else. Something that follows different rules than we're used to. Rules that we don't know. Every approach to decoding the Voynich manuscript has assumed that we should read it the way we read a book. Left to right, top to bottom, word by word. Looking for grammar, looking for vocabulary. looking for the semantic units of human language. But what if the manuscript doesn't work that way? What if the text is not the primary carrier of information? What if the relationship between the text and the illustrations is the actual language? What if a word only means something specific when it appears next to a particular illustration, and the meaning changes when it appears next to a different one? What if the positional rules we've identified, certain characters at the beginning of words, certain characters at the ends, reflect not orthography, but something more like musical notation, instructions for performance rather than storage information? What if it's not meant to be read literally at all, but consulted in a specific order based on some external key we've never found? What if decoding it requires thinking differently? Now, I don't have the answers to these questions. Nobody does. But I think the reason this manuscript has resisted 6 centuries of human intelligence is not that the code is too hard to break. I think it's that we keep trying to break it like humans, and maybe that's not really the right approach. Maybe the problem isn't that we can't read it. Maybe it's that we're trying to read it like us. Now, before we close out, let's take a minute to honor the graveyard of attempted decipherments, because it's actually kind of incredible. The number of extremely intelligent people who have been absolutely certain they had the answer and then been wrong is a story in itself. So first we have William Romain Newbold. Newbold was a philosophy professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and in 1921, the same year Voynich went public with the Roger Bacon theory, Newbold announced that he had decoded the manuscript. His theory was that the visible characters were just a shell. The real cipher was microscopic. Tiny shorthand symbols embedded in the folds and textures of the ink itself, readable only under magnification. Using this system, Newbold claimed to have translated a section of the manuscript as a description by Roger Bacon of using a telescope to observe the spiral structure of the Andromeda galaxy in 1300. 300 years before the telescope was invented. The theory collapsed quickly. Subsequent researchers showed that the microscopic symbols Newbold was reading were simply the natural cracking and fiber patterns of the dried argol ink on aging vellum. He was reading the texture of the paper, not the encoded information. He had basically invented a meaning for the random patterns of decay. But for a few years, he was celebrated. He lectured, he published, he was taken seriously. And this is important to understand. The Voynich has been making smart people see things that aren't there for 100 years. Now, during and after World War II, William Friedman, the man who broke the Japanese purple cipher, which is one of the most impressive cryptanalytic achievements in history, organized an informal study group of Army cryptanalysts to work on the Voynich in their off hours. These were the people who had helped win the war. Brilliant, rigorous, experienced codebreakers. And they tried everything they knew. Substitution, transposition, polyalphabetic systems, codebook analogies, and nothing.
The Maps app that came with your phone? It's fine if you enjoy waiting and guessing and inefficient routes. Or you could use MapQuest. MapQuest is back with live directions, real-time traffic, and faster routes. It moves when you move. Best of all, no printer needed. No paper. No more missed turns. Just you and the app. Get there fast with MapQuest. Download the MapQuest app on the App Store or visit mapquest.com. MapQuest, still getting you there.
Friedman eventually came to believe that the manuscript might encode a constructed language. He spent years on it, and he never cracked it. And he died in 1969 without an answer. His colleague, Elizabeth Friedman, herself one of the greatest cryptanalysts of the 20th century, later said that attempts to decode the manuscript based purely on statistics were doomed to utter frustration. The NSA supported Mary D'Imperio's comprehensive survey of all known decipherment attempts. The conclusion: nothing has worked. Nothing has even come close. In 2016, a Canadian research team used an algorithm to analyze the statistical properties of Voynichese and concluded that it was most similar to jumbled Hebrew words rearranged and encoded, possibly with vowels removed. They claimed excitedly that their system revealed the first line of the manuscript to be a recipe for plant-based recommendations to a priest. Hebrew linguists looked at the resulting translation and noted it was grammatically incoherent and relied on significant and arbitrary spelling corrections to produce any meaning at all. The translation required enough flexibility in symbol assignment to essentially spell anything, which means it didn't prove Hebrew. It proved that given enough degrees of freedom, you can force any writing system to look like any language. Now, this one is one of my favorites because of how it ended. In 2019, Gerard Cheshire, a research associate at the University of Bristol, announced in a press release that he had decoded the manuscript. There's a pattern here, right? He claimed the text was written in Proto-Romance, an undocumented ancestor of the Romance languages, by Dominican nuns in southern Europe as a medical reference for Maria of Castile, Queen of Aragon. The press release got picked up everywhere, major news outlets. Voynich Manuscript finally decoded. The internet briefly lost its mind. Within days, historical linguists had examined Cheshire's work and concluded it was, to put it diplomatically, methodologically unsound. The translations were ad hoc, relying on flexible symbol assignments and invented vowel rules. The resulting Proto-Romance was grammatically incoherent and inconsistent across different sections. Bristol University issued a formal statement distancing itself from his claims, noting that the work represented his personal views and had not been reviewed by the university. Cheshire has continued to insist he is correct. The manuscript remains undecoded. The pattern here is the same every time. Someone finds a compelling statistical similarity between Voynichese and some known language. They work backward from that similarity, assigning symbol values that produce something that looks in a few cherry-picked passages like it might mean something. They announce a solution, experts check the work, and it falls apart. The thing about a language with no known translation is that you can make it look like almost anything, if you're flexible enough about the rules. The real test is whether your solution works consistently, without exceptions, across the entire 240-page text in a way that linguists would recognize as grammatical. And nobody has passed that test. Now, let's talk about what we actually know. Not about the manuscript, but about what it means that it exists. In the early 15th century, somewhere in Europe, probably northern Italy or the German Bohemian region, someone invested significant resources, skilled labor, and considerable time in creating a 240-page document. They organized it into at least 6 distinct sections. They recruited at least 5 different people to write in, again, at least 2 related but distinct registers of an unidentifiable script. They filled it with detailed illustrations of plants that don't exist, astronomical diagrams don't match any earthly sky configuration we found, female figures submerged in a fluid that moves through them like a system, and a massive fold-out map of places or structures or concepts we can't identify. And then, within a generation, maybe 2, every trace of the tradition that produced this book disappeared. No library has a catalog entry for it. No scholar references it. No copy was made. No grammar guide, no vocabulary list, no correspondence about its contents survives. It didn't just go undecoded. It went undiscussed. For 200 years, it sat in a Jesuit library in Rome. The greatest Jesuit scholar of the 17th century, Antasius Kircher, a man who had decoded Egyptian hieroglyphs, who was essentially the Google of his age for esoteric knowledge, received this manuscript and did nothing with it. Either he looked at it and gave up, or he looked at it and understood something we don't. And Kircher did not give up on things easily. So things I can tell you for certain: this book was made by people who understood exactly what they were doing. The care in the illustrations, the structural complexity of the linguistic system, the capital investment in materials, the deliberate organization in the sections. These are not the marks of a hoax. They're the marks of something important to whoever made it. This book has defeated every analytical tool humans have applied to it for 100 years. Not because no one tried hard enough, not because the approach was wrong, because for reasons we don't understand, the thing that would let us decode it simply isn't there. Either it's missing from the pages themselves, or it's missing from our frameworks. And this book has been sitting at Yale for over 50 years, freely available for anyone to study. Its pages freely available online for anyone to examine. The most advanced computing systems in human history have been pointed at it, and nothing. So what is it? I don't think this is a simple cipher. 600 years of the world's best codebreakers say no. I don't think it's a simple hoax. The cost and complexity and the discipline say no. I don't think it's an herbal or medical manual in any straightforward sense. The impossible plants and the undecodable texts say no. What I genuinely think, and this is just me, is that the Voynich Manuscript was produced by someone or something who was trying to record something real, something they had genuine knowledge of. Now, whether that knowledge came from a lost medical tradition, a constructed philosophical language, an altered state of consciousness, or a different galaxy, I don't know. But there is confidence in the handwriting. There's absence of corrections, the structural organization, the multi-person collaboration, the resource investment. These things tell me that whoever wrote this believed in what they were writing, and they were writing it for somebody. But the question is, who was the intended reader? Because it's clearly not us. If it's cipher, the key was never provided to anyone who survived. If it's a constructed language, the grammar guide was never distributed. If this is glossalia or automatic writing, the source is not available for interview. If this is a record of something from somewhere else, something genuinely not from here, then the intended reader might not be human. And maybe the reason 600 years of human intelligence hasn't cracked it isn't a failure of cryptography. Maybe it's that we're the wrong species trying to read the wrong book. The Voynich Manuscript is a book, a real book made of real cows, filled with real ink, held right now in a real university library in New Haven, Connecticut. And for over 600 years, it hasn't said a single word back to us. Maybe the silence is the message. Maybe it's telling us exactly how far we haven't come. Maybe someone or something put exactly as much information in this book as they wanted us to have, and everything else is in the missing pages. Or maybe it's a very elaborate medieval prank, and somewhere in some other dimension, a 15th century Italian forger is absolutely losing his mind. I choose to believe otherwise, but I can't prove it. Nobody can. And that is the whole point. So, guys, thank you so much for listening to the Voynich Manuscript episode. The Voynich Manuscript, Beinecke MS 408, the book that has defeated everyone who has ever tried to read it. If you want to look at it for yourself, and you should, the Beinecke Library has high-resolution scans of every page available online for free. And I'll put the link in the description of the show, so go check it out, see what you see. Maybe you are the one. Maybe whatever it takes to read this thing, you're the one who knows. Seriously, maybe you have some alien DNA, and when you see this, you'll be like, oh, I know exactly what that means. Who knows? Now, if you've been listening to Paranormal Directive 13 for a while, you know we don't really put a neat bow on things at the end here. Now, I don't want you to walk away with a certain conclusion and give you a certain answer. like, this stuff isn't like that. And the interesting parts of this really aren't like that. Now, what I can tell you is that after spending so much time reading this and researching this and listening to other podcast episodes on this, and my buddies Sean, Kathy, and Chris from Weirder After Dark, they did an episode on Voynich Manuscript. They actually have a candle out inspired by the Voynich Manuscript, so check that out. Check out their episode. I want so badly for this book to be written by aliens. So badly, you have no idea. And honestly, I think to me that makes the most sense. Now, we all know I'm a big believer of almost literally everything. I would rather be a believer than a skeptic. It's just more fun and a more like exciting way to look at the world, in my opinion. So I like to believe first, but there's a reason we can't read it. And there's a reason things don't match to anything we know. And there's a reason that we can tell, like, hey, these are planets, these are stars, but we have no idea what they are or where they're from. There's a reason why we don't know where they're from. And in my opinion, it's because they're not from here. Now, if you want to get into the whole, well, why is it written on Earth stuff, like, Earth cows with Earth ink and all that? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, shit. Roswell, they said they crashed and there was bodies here, or maybe they came here and something broke down, or maybe they were just chilling in medieval Europe. I would go back to medieval Europe today. It sounds like a really cool place to visit. Maybe they were just there and they used what was there to write a book and, kind of document their stuff for someone to find and see in the future. Maybe they thought we'd be a lot fucking smarter and could read what they wrote. That's a possibility too. But I don't know. All I know is there's a really weird book at Yale. No one can read it. And I think it was written by aliens. All right, guys. So if you like the episode, please leave a rating, leave a review, share the show. I put a video up on social media about trying to boost the ratings on the show. Please, please, please go and share the show and rate the show and leave a review. It is the best thing you could do to help grow the show and reach new audiences. We've been growing pretty steadily, but shit, man, I want to grow faster. So share it and leave a review and leave a rating, and hopefully we can reach more people, because we should have more listeners than Joe Rogan, because we talk about cooler stuff, in my opinion. So do that. That would be amazing. Check out social medias, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all at Paranormal Directive 13. And then check out the Patreon, patreon.com/Paranormal Directive 13, where for a minimum of $3 a month now, we have adjusted things. There's a $3, a $5, and a $10 tier. You can get ad-free episodes. Ad-free episodes are the mid-tier. But you can get access to ad-free episodes, you can get access to bonus mini episodes, you can get access to voting powers for future episodes. And for $7 a month, you can become a member and also donate to the Mantis Research Fund, which we've been talking about recently. Because if you or anyone you know has ever been affected by Mantis entities, consider joining the Mantis Research tier so we can investigate into what's going on with that. And what that really means is it'll help me buy more equipment and stuff for the podcast, which would be amazing. So thank you guys. I really hope you liked the episode. And just remember, somewhere out there is a book that for 400 years has been trying to tell us something, and we just can't understand it.
The Bleacher Report app is your destination for sports. Right now, the NBA's heating up, March Madness is here, and MLB is almost back. Every day there's a new headline, a new highlight, a new moment you've got to see for yourself. That's why I stay locked in with the Bleacher Report app. For me, it's about staying connected to my sports. I can follow the teams I care about, get real-time scores, breaking news, and highlights all in one place. Download the Bleacher Report app today so you never miss a moment.
Hey, it's Howie Mandel, and I am inviting you to witness history as me and my Howie Do It gaming team take on Gilly the King and Wallow 267's $1 million gaming in an epic Global Gaming League video game showdown. 4 rounds, multiple games, 1 winner, plus a halftime performance by multi-platinum artist Travie McCoy. Watch all the action and see who wins and advances to the championship match against Neo right now at globalgamingleague.com. That's globalgamingleague.com. Everybody games.